Hey, my name is Daniel. I'm 26. I'm a plumber. And 3 weeks ago, my neighbor knocked on my door at exactly 2:14 in the morning. Barefoot, no explanation, just a thin coat and those eyes, and asked if she could stay the night. She was married. She lived 30 feet away. And when I stepped aside and let her in, the smell of her perfume hit me like something I'd been missing without knowing it. We sat at my kitchen table the next morning, coffee between us, and she looked at me and said, "I've watched you for months. You seem comfortable with being alone. I've never been able to figure out how you do that." Nothing official happened that first night, but by the end of the week, something did, and I have never been the same since. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I don't know what made me open the door. Maybe it was the knock itself. It was firm, not frantic. Like whoever was on the other side had thought about it before raising their hand. Like they'd almost talked themselves out of it and done it anyway. It was 2:14 in the morning. I keep a small clock on my nightstand, the old kind, with actual hands. I'd been half awake for a while already, that restless kind of not sleeping where your body's tired but your mind keeps circling. The kind of night that already feels long before anything happens. I'm a plumber, have been since I was 22. I'm 26 now, been in that house almost 2 years. Bought it with money I saved after things ended with Lena. We weren't married. But for years we'll do what a marriage does when it ends. The house is small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that opens into the living room, a back door that sticks in winter. The street is the kind of neighborhood where houses sit close together, but people manage to pretend they don't notice each other. Lawns kept neat. Curtains drawn after 9. She lived next door. I knew her the way you know someone you've never actually spoken to. She drove a dark green car. Always put together, even taking out the trash. She looked considered. Her husband left early in a newer SUV. New gutters. Fresh paint every couple of years. Flowers replaced before they died. I'd nodded at her once or twice. She'd nodded back. That was the whole history between us before the knock. When I opened the door, she was standing barefoot on my porch. Thin coat, no shoes. The porch light caught the side of her face and she looked composed, as she was working hard to hold herself still. "I'm sorry to do this," she said. Low, controlled. I stood there trying to wake up enough to understand what was happening. "I'm Claire," she said. "I live next, I know," I said. "I know who you are." Soppy moved across her face. "Relief? Maybe? Can I? ... She stopped, looked down at her bare feet on the cold porch. "Can I stay here tonight?" I didn't think it through. I just stepped to the side and held the door open. She walked in without another word. She stood in the middle of my living room and looked around slowly, not judging, more like placing herself on a map she hadn't expected to be on. My place is simple. Worn couch, floor lamp, coffee table with a ring stain I keep meaning to deal with, books half-read on the windowsill. I told her she could have the couch, pulled out a gray blanket from the closet, asked if she wanted water and she said yes. She stood holding the glass with both hands, looking at a framed photo on my bookshelf, a stretch of Wyoming road going away into distance. "You take that?" she asked. "Yeah." She nodded slowly, like that, answered something she wasn't quite asking. I said goodnight and went back to my room. Closed the door softly. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and listened. The refrigerator hummed. A distant car passed. Through the thin wall, I could hear small things. The soft shift of the couch, a slow exhale, someone trying not to make noise. I almost got up 3 times, but I thought about her bare feet on the porch. You don't walk out without shoes unless you left before you had time to think. Unless something made you want out before the decision was fully formed. The sounds from the other room went still around 4. The next thing I knew, light was coming under my door, and I could smell coffee. She'd found the coffee maker and already poured a mug for me, pointed toward where I'd come in. She looked different in the morning, not composed exactly, more like she'd been through the night and come out the other side, the effort of holding herself together slightly less urgent. She was beautiful, I'll say that plainly. Not in a flashy way, in a real, lived-in way. 45 I'd later find out. Fine lines near her eyes that showed in the morning light, the kind of beautiful that doesn't need a good angle. We sat at the kitchen table and talked the way people do when they're too tired to perform. Bluntly, slowly, leaving space between words. She asked what I did. I told her plumbing. She didn't recalibrate the way some people do. She just asked if I liked it. I said mostly yes. She took that seriously. I found out why she'd left. Not through any big reveal. It came out the way real things do. She'd picked up her husband's phone to check the time and seen messages. Not another woman. Just Richard talking about her, to someone dismissive things. Small things. The language you use for someone you've stopped seeing. Nothing I could point to in an argument, she said, turning her mug on the table. Just the way he described me. Like I was furniture that had started to annoy him. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I didn't want to lie next to someone who thinks of me like that, she said. So I walked. She handed me her empty mug to refill, and when our fingers met around the handle, neither of us moved for just a second longer than we should have. It was nothing. It was a mug, but I felt it for the rest of the morning. We heard the car at 11:10. She was on her feet before I'd registered the sound. That's Richard. She checked the window at an angle, careful, practiced, and something tightened in her face. Through the back, I said. She hadn't asked, but it was the right thing to say, and she knew it. I unlocked the back door. Cold air came in. She crossed the narrow strip of yard between our houses without rushing, got to her side door, went in. She didn't look back. I stood there with the cold coming through the open door and thought about that. The not looking back part. Her mug was still on my coffee table. I left it there. I ran into Mrs. Hargrove an hour later. 63, silver-haired, always looks like she slept well and has opinions about it. Quiet night, she said, and her eyes drifted briefly toward my house before coming back. It's pretty quiet, I said. I thought I saw your lights on quite late. Couldn't sleep. Had the reading lamp on. She nodded, held the look a beat longer than comfortable, then smiled and said, "Have a nice day." Some people can say something that means two things at once. She'd done it cleanly. The afternoon was the hardest part. Claire came outside around 2, checking something in the front bed, crouching down, hair up now, clean and pressed, the full version of herself, reinstalled. She didn't look toward my house. I wasn't surprised, but I noticed it. The way you notice an absence you weren't sure you were counting on. I went to the garage and reorganized pipe fittings that didn't need reorganizing. She came back at 7:30. She was holding my mug when I opened the door. "I wanted to return this," she said. She had earrings in now, a different coat, the version of herself that belonged on her side of the yard. But she was holding the mug with both hands, not quite meeting my eyes the way someone does when they know they're using an excuse. "You could have kept it," I said. "I know." A glance passed me into the living room. "I just wanted to check you were okay." I stepped back from the door, left enough space. She made the choice herself. She came in. We talked for a long time. She told me about her son Evan, about watercolors she used to paint and never went back to. I told her about Lena, how we'd stayed a year past when it was good because change felt harder than the slow ache of staying. She listened to that like she was filing it somewhere careful. "You left, though," she said. "Eventually." "Yeah, that took something." Then she said quietly, "I've watched you." Like it was a fact she'd been carrying and finally decided to set down. "Yarutis? The way you leave for work? Sometimes you sit on your porch in the evenings, not long, just 15 minutes, and then go in." She paused. "You seem comfortable with being alone?" "I am," I said. "Mostly, I'm not," she said. "But I live like I am." We were quiet, and then, "I've wanted to talk to you for a while. I just never had a reason that seemed adequate." "You knocked on my door at 2 in the morning, I said, barefoot. Something opened in her face, a laugh she didn't quite let out, but it was in her eyes. She stood to leave, said it was getting late. She was near the front door, coat in hand, and the distance between us was less than it had been all evening. She turned toward me, and we were very close. Not deliberately, just the way the room arranged itself. I could smell her perfume, something warm and quiet, cedar and something softer underneath. I'd noticed it the night before on the blanket. We were close enough that if either of us had leaned just slightly, a car door slammed outside. She took one step back, not panicked, decisive, a door closing. "I should go," she said, voice steady, hands not quite. "Okay," I said. I stepped back too, made it easy for her. She buttoned her coat carefully, looked at me once more at the door, a look I couldn't fully read, except that it was not nothing. "Good night, Daniel. Good night, Claire." She didn't come back that night. I lay awake and waited anyway. The way you do when you know something is over but your body hasn't caught up yet. The quiet had a shape to it now. I thought about what she'd said. "I've watched you," not like something she was ashamed of, like a fact she'd been carrying and finally set down. I thought about her noticing my small routines, watching me come home with tools in the back of the truck. Me, in the daily way that means more than staring. I'd been lonely here. I knew it the way you know a sound you've stopped hearing because it's always there. The blanket on the couch still held a trace of her perfume. I didn't move it. Morning came, gray and still. Her curtains were closed, both of them. She never had the bedroom curtains closed in the morning. I didn't realize I'd registered that until the absence made itself known. Lena called that afternoon. She has a way of calling when something's unbalanced in me. "You sound distracted," she said, 10 minutes in. "Just tired." "Tired? How?" "The regular kind." A pause. Then, "There's something off. Not bad, just different." I kept my answers short. When we hung up, I stood in the kitchen and felt something between guilt and something harder to name. I hadn't done anything. I kept telling myself that Evner arrived that evening. I didn't know who he was at first. Just a car. Young energy. The way he grabbed his bag in one motion. Claire came out to meet him, and the way she held the hug told me everything about how tight she'd been carrying herself. He was her build, her coloring, 19 or 20. With him there, The house felt less sealed. But for me it meant something more concrete, more eyes, more variables, in an already unstable thing. Access, I thought. Then I stopped myself for thinking that word, because it implied I had some right to it. I didn't. She was a married woman who'd spent one night on my couch? That was the full sum of it. I went to bed early and didn't sleep. 2 days passed without a word. Not 2 days of nothing, 2 days of small sightings that added up to something. Her car leaving in the morning, Evan on the front porch with his phone, Richard's SUV gone by 7, back by 7, the reliable machinery of that life running on its tracks, and me, going through my own motions, work, groceries. An evening on the porch, I'd cut short because it felt too deliberate, sitting there. Like I was waiting for something I had no right to wait for. The routine felt hollow in a way it hadn't before she knocked. That was the thing I kept coming back to. My life before that night had been quiet, and I'd called that peace. Now the quiet had a different texture, like a room where a sound had stopped and you couldn't stop noticing the absence of it. I thought about her often, not in a spiral, just the way a thought returns when it has somewhere real to land. The way she'd held that mug with both hands. The way she'd said, "I live like I am," with no performance in it. The step back she'd taken, decisive a door closing. I respected that step back. I did. But the door hadn't fully closed, and I think we both knew it. On the third morning, I woke up and her curtains were open again. Small thing. I know how that sounds. But I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee and saw the light coming through her front window the way it used to, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. I didn't do anything with that information. I just drank my coffee and noted it and went to work. But I drove home a different way that evening. A long way, through the neighborhood, past the park. I don't know why, maybe just to give myself time before I arrived somewhere I'd started to feel too much about. The scarf appeared on a Thursday. I found it when I stepped outside early to check the weather before getting dressed for work. It was folded on the corner of my porch railing. Not dropped, not forgotten, folded, placed. A soft gray-green thing that I recognized immediately because I had seen it around her neck that night. The first night, before she took it off and left it on the arm of my couch. I picked it up, held it for a moment, cedar and something solder. She'd been on my porch. In the night, probably, she'd come across the yard in the dark and left this and gone back. I stood there in the cold morning with the scarf in my hands and tried to think clearly. She could have just kept it. It was hers. She could have knocked, handed it over, said I found this at yours, and we could have both played the fiction that it had simply been forgotten. But she'd placed it, folded on my railing at some quiet hour and hadn't knocked. Hadn't made it a moment that required a response. Except that it did. It required a response and she knew it. I went inside, picked up my phone. I typed, "You forgot this?" Sat with that for a minute. Sent it. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, like she'd been awake. Like she'd maybe been watching for exactly this. Her reply came through quiet and clean. No, I didn't. I read that message 4 times. Not because it was complicated, because it was simple, and simple things sometimes need to be looked at slowly to make sure you're reading them right. I set the phone down, made coffee, stood at the window. The light in her kitchen was on, the same soft yellow I'd started to recognize as hers. And I thought about her on the other side of that light, reading my message before I'd even sent it. Waiting for it. Something in me settled. Not into certainty, into something quieter than that. Like the moment before a conversation when you realize the other person already knows what you're going to say and isn't afraid of it. I didn't text back right away. I let it sit. Let her let it sit. Some things don't need an answer immediately. The message had already said what it needed to say, and so had hers. We were on the same page as something that didn't have a name yet. 3 days after the scarf, she walked by my house in the late afternoon. She did it slowly, not a strolling pace exactly, more like someone making a point of not rushing. I was on the porch, where I'd been for about 10 minutes with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, not quite reading the book, opening on my knee. She came from the far end of the street, not from her own front walk, and she was wearing the gray-green scarf. I noticed that first. She looked up when she reached my house. She didn't look away. Neither did I. We didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't smile exactly, though something in her face did something that I felt rather than saw. She held the look for 3 or 4 seconds long, in the open air of a neighborhood where curtains twitch, and then she walked on. I sat on my porch after she turned the corner. Didn't move for a while. That look said things. I couldn't have written them down, but they were said. She knocked that night at 8. No excuse this time. No mug. No returned item. Just a knock. And when I opened the door, she was standing there with her hands in her coat pockets and a look that was halfway between determined and terrified. "Evan's at a friend's tonight," she said. "Richard is in Boston." She let that sit for a moment. "I didn't want to be alone," she said. "In that house?" I opened the door wider. She came in, and this time, it was different. Not the relief of the first night or the careful choreography of the second evening. This time she walked in like someone who had thought about it and made a choice and was living with the weight of that choice in real time. She sat on the couch. I sat in the chair across from her. The lamp was on. The house was quiet. "I'd been thinking about what you said," she said. "About staying a year past when it was good." "Yeah, I've been doing that," she said. "For longer than a year." She said it plainly. Not dramatically, not fishing for something, just stating a fact she'd arrived at and needed to say out loud to someone who would hear it without complicating it. "How long?" I said. She thought about it. "For years. Maybe 5, if I'm honest." A pause. "Probably 5. I nodded. "The house is beautiful," she said. "The life looks right. From the outside it looks exactly like it's supposed to." She looked down at her hands. "I've been maintaining the appearance of something that stopped being real a long time ago." "What stopped it?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. "He stopped seeing me. Not suddenly, slowly, the way a light dims. And I kept adjusting to the lower light until I forgot it had ever been brighter." The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. "And then you knocked on my door," I said. She looked up, and then I knocked on your door. We talked for 2 hours. Not about Richard, not about what any of this was or wasn't, just about things, real things. She told me about a summer she spent in Portugal at 23, before any of the life she'd built had been built. How she'd eaten dinner at 10 at night because that's when the restaurants filled up and the air smelled like salt and bread. How she'd painted every day and felt absolutely certain, for the only time in her life, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. I told her about a job I did 2 winters ago, a house out past the edge of town, old pipes, the whole system, frozen solid. I'd worked alone for 3 days in a basement that smelled like cold clay and rust. I said it was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. She understood that in a way that most people don't. The peace of quiet, hard work, that asks nothing from you except to show up. "You're easy to be with," she said. "You've said something like that before. It's still true." She looked at me steadily, maybe more so. The lamp threw warm light across the space between us. She had her shoes off. I'd noticed her slip them off at some point without making a thing of it. The way you do when you've stopped performing comfort and started feeling it. She was sitting sideways on the couch now, legs tucked up, facing me. Relaxed in a way I hadn't seen her before. The careful architecture of her usual self was still there, but it had softened at the edge. The lamplight caught the line of her jaw, and I looked at it for a moment longer than I should have and didn't apologize for it. She saw me looking. She didn't look away. She stayed late, later than either of us had planned. I think the conversation slowed and got comfortable in the way it does when 2 people run out of surface things and aren't ready to stop being in the room together. We talked less, sat in the quiet more. At some point she went to use the bathroom, and I sat in the chair alone for a minute and had a very clear thought. This is the moment something either becomes real or it doesn't. Not because anything dramatic was about to happen. Just because I knew the way you know things in your body before your mind catches up. That when she came back into the room, however the next few minutes went, they would define some. Draw a line. Either a line we'd crossed or a line that held. She came back. Sat back down, same position, tucked her legs up, looked at me. "I should probably go," she said. "Probably," I said. She didn't move. I didn't move. And then she did. She leaned forward, reached across the space between the couch and the chair, and put her hand over mine where it rested on the armrest. Just placed it there. Palm down. Warm. Still, I turned my hand over slowly and held hers. We stayed like that for a while. Not looking at each other, both looking at the lamp, the floor, anywhere else. Just 2 people holding hands in a quiet room, which sounds small and is actually enormous. "I don't know what this is," she said. "Neither do I," I said. "It doesn't feel like nothing." "No," I said. "It really doesn't." She squeezed my hand once. Then she stood, collected herself slowly, put her shoes back on. I stood too. At the door she turned and looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped back in, put both hands on my face, and kissed me. Brief, deliberate. Her eyes were open when she pulled back, and she looked at me with something in her face that I can only describe as resolve, like she'd answered a question she'd been sitting with for a long time. "Good night," she whispered. She left. I stood at the closed door and pressed my fingers to my mouth. I won't tell you the night that came after. Not because nothing happened. Because some things belong to the silence between 2 people and lose something when they're given words. What I'll say is this. She came back the following evening, and Richard was still in Boston, and Evan was still gone, and the night was long and warm, in the way that late autumn nights almost never are. We had a night together that I've never been able to fully explain to myself, let alone anyone else. The kind that doesn't feel like a beginning or an end. Just a thing that existed completely in itself, whole and impossible. In the morning she was gone before I woke up. The pillow beside me still held the shape of her, and the room was full of that perfume, Isidore, and something softer, and for a long time I just lay there and looked at the ceiling, and felt something I didn't have a name for. Everything after that was different. Not louder, actually quieter. But the quiet meant something different now. Richard came back from Boston. Life next door resumed its visible shape, his SUV in the driveway. There are lights on the usual schedule, the performance of a normal house. I watched it from mine and didn't judge it and didn't know what to do with any of it. She and I didn't meet again, not intentionally, not with a plan, but we existed in a new way in the space between our houses. Some mornings I'd come out to the porch and there'd be something small in the railing, once a folded piece of paper with nothing written in it, just a pressed leaf from her yard inside. Once a single stem from one of her front bed flowers, already gone to seed. Things that couldn't be explained to anyone but needed no explanation between us. I'd leave things too. A mug of coffee on the railing on the mornings I knew her routine. Once a small stone from the Wyoming road trip, smooth and gray. Nothing that could be questioned. Everything that could be understood. Mrs. Hargrove stopped me one morning in late November. "You seem different lately," she said. "Pleasantly lighter," she said. Like something settled. She held the look for a moment, that too-meaning look of hers. Then she smiled and moved on. I didn't confirm or deny anything. There was nothing to confirm. And yet she knew. Some people always do. Evan left on a Sunday. I watched him load the car, Claire handing him a bag, him talking with his hands the way she doesn't. They stood in the driveway for a long time after the bags were in. She watched his car until it turned off the street, then she stood alone in her driveway for a moment. She turned toward her house, paused, and then slowly turned her head toward mine. I was in the window. I didn't hide. She looked at me for a long moment across the strip of yard between us. Her face was tired and soft in the Sunday morning light, more unguarded than I'd seen it outside the four walls of my house. She raised one hand, small, unhurried. I raised mine. She went inside. I don't know what she's decided. I don't know what she'll decide. That's not mine to know. I know she's still there. I know some mornings the curtains open at the same time. Mine do. I know some evenings when I sit on my porch, the light in her kitchen stays on a little longer. And sometimes I catch the shape of her moving past the window, unhurried, like someone who knows they're not invisible. I know that the scarf is still in my house, on the hook by the front door where I put it the morning I found it on the railing. She's never asked for it back. I've never offered it when Ta came properly after that. The cold kind. The kind that makes the space between two houses feel like distance worth measuring. But I stopped feeling the way I had before she knocked that hollowed-out quiet, the kind that had no shape. The quiet now was different, inhabited, like something was resting in it without needing to announce itself. Some things don't need to be named to be real. I know that now in a way I didn't before. Some connections don't need a label. They just need two people who keep showing up, slowly, carefully, in the small language of folded scarves and porch railing mugs, and looks held a second too long in the open air. I don't know what any of this becomes. But some nights, when it's late and the street is still, I look at that clock on my nightstand, the old one, with actual hands, and I think about 2:14 a.m., and the knock that was firm but not frantic. And the woman standing barefoot on my porch who had almost talked herself out of it. And I think about how everything changed with one step to the side, and how I'd do it again without a second thought. Some nights don't end. They just wait for the right moment to begin again. Some doors don't close. They stay slightly open, just enough.